It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood of the Constitution and American life with the Friends of Publius, or better known as the FOPs. Please, teachers, students, and the generally curious, don't confuse us with the Fraternal Order of the Police. We are the Friends of Publius, and we will not be violating our principles by endorsing any candidate for president. Before we get to today's discussion, teachers, here is our question of the day that you may want to bounce around with your students as you cover the Unit 3 question. This last week, the Speaker of the House and leader of the Republican caucus has proposed legislation to require either a birth certificate or passport be shown before being able to register to vote. Is this a good approach to protecting the integrity of the vote? What problems, if any, do you see with this law? Hopefully have a good discussion, and hopefully our discussion tonight might give you some insights on how to approach that. So, well, gentlemen, oh my gosh, Mr. Kavanaugh.
Well, I just want to put this out here. That's going to create a problem in my state because we're the only state in the union where one does not have to register to vote.
Okay, well, we'll see how the caucus from South Dakota in
North
the
Dakota.
House and Senate, or North Dakota, I'm sorry, votes on that. Then I did not realize you don't have to register to vote.
No, but you got to have ID to vote.
Oh, okay, okay. A lower bar of registration, but that's interesting. That's interesting. Well, gentlemen, I attended my first Dodger game in 3 years and sat amongst one of the smallest crowds at Dodger Stadium in my life. Didn't know if it was because of the opening day of the Roman Empire games, or better known as American style football, the NFL, or the fact that it was the hottest day game in the history of Dodger Stadium. 103 degrees up where we were, but I can't imagine what it was like on the field there. But since our seats were in the shade, it was a rather pleasant experience. Got to hear Shohei Ohtani's home run, but I honestly will say that I never saw it. So, FOPs, 19 games left until the end of the MLB's regular season. Are we feeling confident there, Mike?
Confident that there's 19 games left in the season?
Yeah. No, your team, they're still in the running. They are not mathematically eliminated.
My team is dunzo.
Yeah. Not feeling confident, huh?
No. Did you see the error yesterday?
Which error?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Yeah, there was an error, and then they got into a scuffle in the dugout, these two rookies, over who should have caught the ball, allowing 2 runs to score. I don't know.
I got it. You take it. Oh, poop. Heck. Kavanaugh, are you feeling confident?
Well, I am now because we got a 3-game set at the Dodgers.
Yeah.
So,
and again, you're going against Dodger pitching. You guys actually get to face Yamamoto tomorrow night. So be gentle.
Well, I mean, the last time, I was going to talk about Pearl Harbor, but I probably won't bring that up with Admiral Yamamoto. But could you leave the Dodger dogs out, just put them out, and they would cook themselves?
I would imagine so. Like I said, it was funny is because where we were sitting, we were in the shade, but we were on the first base side. And as the sun was moving, more and more rows would be in the sunshine, and you just see people all on the first base side all get up and go look for seats. It was amazing. Like I said, I've never seen so many empty seats at the field level. Am
I confident? No, I'm not confident. I'm a Cubs fan. People say, "Are you a baseball fan?" I say, "No, I'm a Cubs fan." So I am not confident. But we are over 500, so okay.
Yeah. And there, Mr. Moore, we're feeling confident.
I'm quite confident we will be in the playoffs, and I'm quite confident we'll have a first-round exit. We're famous for those.
Well, I'm just hoping we can maintain our position. I don't know if it's a good idea to have a bye. The Dodgers have had a bye, and for most of the time, it doesn't work out. Too much sitting around waiting for those. So yeah, I know, tears here, kind of stuff. But you spend $1 billion and see how you feel about that.
We did. We got Tim's manager.
Yeah. That's going to be one of the great stories at the end of the season there. So Today, we are going to be addressing Article 1, Section 4, and the constitutional arrangement for administering elections and voting in the United States. Our source for this discussion is Unit 3 in the We the People text, and the specific question can be found in the We the People State Question, Unit 3, Question 2. Our first question will be addressed to our guru of America's past, Professor Tim Moore. So, Professor Moore, I want you to explain to me, all right, talk to me like I'm a fourth grader. Explain to me why the framers believed the national government could regulate commerce, they could establish post offices and postal roads, but they couldn't provide a national system of federal elections. I just don't get it.
Well, you're comparing apples to oranges there, but I mean they could easily do post offices and post roads because there was a legacy of those things existing before the Constitution. I mean, even the articles, there's a provision in the articles for the creation of post office and post roads being created. And frankly, in that day, those were seen kind of as a part of a national entity, but also more importantly, commerce. Information has always been a piece of commerce. So I think the post roads and the post offices are kind of connected to that idea of there being a national government role in commerce. And we all know that one of the things on their agenda when they went to Philadelphia is commercial improvements. So I think those things are entirely predictable. Now, to your other, the piece about elections, I think it's interesting. I kind of take the view that the reason that clause is there is for a couple of reasons. One, there's a practical, there's a federalism piece why it's there, and there's also some historical reasons why it's there. And the historical is largely the failures of the Articles Congress. I mean, there were early in the 80s, Georgia didn't even send representatives to Articles Congress. Connecticut was unrepresented in latter part of 86 and 87. Most of the time, they couldn't get 7 sets of delegates to be there as a quorum to even do business. So, and largely because under the Articles, the state legislatures controlled their elections and sometimes wouldn't even have elections. And I mean, Connecticut one year elected 7 people to Congress and 2 only went. So, I mean, it's kind of like Keystone Cops, the Articles Congress in terms of attendance. So, there's a very practical historical answer here that the reason it's there, and it's kind of a veiled threat, and the Anti-Federalists pick up on this. They look at that in the Constitution. They say, "Ooh, we fear a federal takeover of administrating our elections." Now, you know, the fact that there are federal elections be damned. They're always sensitive about Anti-Federalists are about federal intrusion into local matters. And they still see election to the national government as a local matter. So there's a lot of suspicions about that. And just as another practical, does the national legislature have all the information about County X, where the rivers go this way and the mountains go that way, and local officials will know where the best places for the polling. Now, there's a naive assumption that the local officials are going to be nice and set up the polling places convenient to the localities, but certainly the national government's not going to know all those local details. So I think there's a practical reason for the states being in charge of the federal elections, because they know their turf in a very practical way. So, and the federalism answer is there's all kinds of bargains at Philadelphia on the federalism piece. And I think this is one of those where we're not going to definitively say we're going to run roughshod over your elections, but if you don't have them, we might step in. So, and the Anti-Federalists are always going to are going to look at that askance and see great suspicion about that. So I think there's a lot of reasons why that clause is there.
Well, I'm hoping you understand the spirit is that, I don't know if it's apples and oranges when we look at feasibility. because the fact of the matter is, yeah, we've got an Articles of Confederation, we have a Congress, but you've just laid out some of the weakness and incompetence of that Congress. And so I don't know how deep the tradition is to do anything on a national level. Yet they presuppose that we can lay out these roads, we can build or establish these post offices. And so I guess, so it seemed to me, and one of the things I've heard is people said, well, it just won't be feasible to hold a national election on a same day kind of thing. It's not feasible given our tradition and things. So is that the overwhelming thing? It's the tradition. It's a short one, but the tradition that's existed, for 100 years or so in the colonies in the States.
The tradition of what? I'm not sure.
Is that the overwhelming influence? I mean, federalism, yeah, we're going to get into that a little bit more. But in the last analysis, is it just we're going to do some things, we're going to trust the national government. It seems to me if you're going to have a national government, you should have a national election that's uniform, all right, throughout the country. But this article undermines uniformity, all right, and even to this day, all right, creates a web of chaos of this country holding national elections. Did they at all anticipate that?
Yes, they did. And
okay.
In the first Congress, there was some discussion in August of '89, to your point about because they're already talking, the first Congress under the Constitution is talking about normalizing and nationalizing the elections. And there's so much tremendous, there's a guy coming out of South Carolina, his name is Burke. He gives a whole series of speech about, I mean, you think you're back in the ratification debates about this draconian federal government running roughshod. And again, I think Chris has said this in previous in episodes. It's the Constitution comes out, and one of the main considerations in Philadelphia is not so much as what's in the Constitution per se, is can this get passed? Is there enough tip of the hat to the states? Now, the Anti-Federalists don't think there is enough, but there's all kinds of federalism bargains that are occurring. This is one of those. And in the first Congress, they're talking about nationalizing the elections. There's this wonderful speech by Madison in the first Congress. It says, states, because he wrote a whole screed against the states in the 80s about how awful the states were. And he continues that theme that states are already, and even some of the elections during ratification. I mean, you talk about shenanigans. So he's already pushing back on this resistance to federal government oversight, and pointing out that some of the states are still not behaving virtuously on behalf of their citizens to ensure good representation at the national government. So the debate was at ratification, and the debate was in the first Congress about this clause. How much power was, in those words? Was it, a threat? Was it just, don't worry about it, they're not going to step in? So they're continually discuss this even after ratification.
Yeah, Chris.
Which Brutus number did he worry about this? I think one of Brutus's, the Anti-Federalist, was writing about this, one of his higher numbers. I can't remember the essay off the top of my head, but he was
it is
about this.
Shocking. It is shocking how much. I mean, you don't think about this, when you think about Federalist Papers and Anti-Federalist writers. It was shocking to me when I first started working with John Kaminsky at the center, how much Anti-Federalist literature, essays, writings there were on this clause. In fact, it may be the most disturbing issue for Anti-Federalists, this potential federal oversight of
Hamilton, though. I thought Hamilton, then one of his papers, Federalist Papers,
59, 60, 61 is where he addresses
it. So he's like, don't worry, you're still maintaining control here. Don't and Brutus is, and as you alluded to, other Anti-Federalists saying, well, no. And this is my take. And again, to David, to your question, I think for a lot of this is like, there were already processes in place. We're going to have some bigger things to worry about, right? And so states have already been running elections. They know how to run elections. let them go, just the mechanizations of running an election, let them run it. And if we need to, we'll step in.
Okay, so let's go.
Dave, you'll be happy to know that Madison he kind of is using your words, you're befuddled at this. In that first, in August of '89, when they're talking about this clause in Congress, the quote, I wrote this down, if we allow state control, I'm paraphrasing because Madison would take a page and a half to say this. If we allow states to control, it would ensure the destruction of a national government. He's your guy, Dave.
Yeah. Yep. Well, he is. He is. So let's go a little bit deeper then into Article 1, Section 4 here, because it does not delegate sole authority to the states regarding time, place, and manner of federal elections. It does say that Congress may at any time, by law, make or alter such regulations. So, Professor Kavanaugh, based upon your understanding, your experiences here, could you explain to me, all right, when and under what circumstances Congress would have to play a role in the time, place, and manner of federal elections?
Well, 1842 was the first time they're going to jump in.
Really?
Yeah, really. Right?
I didn't do my thorough homework then. Explain.
In 1842, they passed a law requiring election of representatives by district.
Okay.
That was their first attempt. They were going to go through this whole process in different years. In 1866, they were successful at legislating a remedy to situations with deadlocks with state legislatures over the election of senators or creating vacancies in the office. Mm-hmm. So there were problems in state legislatures. Hey, you guys need to get it together. So we're going to come up with a process here for helping you break these deadlocks. The act required 2 houses of each legislature to meet in joint session on a specific day to meet until they elect a senator. Well, so they're reluctant, and probably the one of the most early, 1870. I don't guess that's not early. Is and a means for enforcing the 15th Amendment. So you have Congress stepping in to help enforce that 15th Amendment.
Yeah, and again, I want to get to the, because obviously I think the big moment is post-Civil War there, but and this is probably for you and Tim. It seems to me that this is kind of a insurance policy. All right, we're going to give the Anti-Federalists what they want. Okay, states, you get to do this, but they sense that could be problematical. But I guess I'm trying to get into their mind is they use this language. So they had, to me, they were anticipating some circumstances in which Congress would have to act. And I'm just wondering in 1787, 88, what possible circumstances, since they're saying, okay, states get to do this. And that's my big problem. If states are already set up to do this, I'm fine with that. The states get to do it, but why not have national standards?
Well, they tried in August of '86. They lumped 6 proposed amendments to the articles, and the last one, Article 20 of these proposed amendments, was actual, to your point, David, they had a schedule when states would have to have their elections. A month later, they'd have to have notification. A month later, if you were elected, you had to notify if you intended to go. There were sanctions against non-attendance. So, I mean, very early, the Articles Congress was proposing a change upon the state, which these did not pass because it took unanimity to amend the articles. But they laid out this systematic national standard that was rejected. So, I mean, there's this even before the Constitution, we're attempting to try to nationalize, even during the articles.
Okay, my befuddlement is I don't understand the fear. If it's still going to be state officers, all right, carrying this out, what's the threat to state sovereignty if Congress says, okay, just how you laid it out? Here's the
It's
date.
Whig suspicion. It's a gradualism. You know, you give the federal government an inch, they're going to take a mile. This is going to lead to the hip bone, and the hip bone's connected to the hip bone, and pretty soon and it's like this fear of consolidation. When you look at it, as if you're an anti-federalist, you look at all these clauses, and what's the common glue? It's consolidation of power. So give an inch, they're going to take a mile. It's this Whig tradition of suspicion of centralized power, I think.
Like, I think it's also like the Boston Tea Party in a way, because when the East India Tea Company got the monopoly for the tea, it was cheaper, right? It was cheaper than what the colonists were already buying. But again, if we give in to this, what's next? So we're gonna do our thing. I think it's interesting when I was doing some research for this, David. Another chapter of Congress stepping in, and this was like, whoa, this is pretty good. It was like in 1907 when they passed the Tillman Act, prohibiting national banks and corporations from making contributions in federal elections. And then they came up with the Corrupt Practices Act in 1910, the idea to try and limit money in politics and limit this kind of thing. And holy cow, oops, well, that ship has sailed.
Well, thank you for some clarity, gentlemen, there. Appreciate that. So
it's not always neat, David. You're a political scientist at heart. It's not that neat, man.
No.
I mean, we can't put it in this bucket and that bucket.
Just looking for some consistency here. Are we to be a nation? I think that was the fundamental question there. So Professor Williams, Chris has, educated me that there was some action before the Civil War by Congress on elections. But to my knowledge, the first major action was the 14th Amendment there, which is both congressional and state action to create some kind of national sense of identity, and it seems to me the 14th Amendment clearly provides for a right to vote, which would therefore require that Congress regulate elections more than they have before. But obviously I'm wrong there, because we have to have a 15th Amendment. Why did, in your opinion, why did we need a 15th Amendment given the language of the 14th?
Well, this is where maybe I don't read the 14th Amendment. I'm assuming you're talking about Section 2, right?
Yeah.
I don't see that as establishing a right to vote. I see it as establishing a penalty to states that take away the vote from male citizens, all male citizens. So I don't see any sort of like anybody having standing to go and argue that they have this fundamental right. I think it's more of a process issue. It's a way of coercing, of kind of punishing, making sure that these southern states and maybe even northern states, that if they choose to stop people from voting, then they're going to be punished in terms of their representation, right? Because that's how the number is going to be come up with. So I don't read it now. Maybe you've come across some information or some interpretations of this that I haven't, but I just don't see it in the 14th Amendment. The other place I guess you could see it is you could argue that it is a privilege or immunity, right, to vote, or that it's a liberty right. But the court pretty quickly in slaughterhouse cases tells us the privileges and immunities doesn't mean basically anything, and we've been having debates over what the due process clause means for a long time. So I don't know enough. I didn't do the research to know whether the writers of the 14th intended there to be a right to vote through either of these phrases or Section 2. Maybe Chris or Tim or you know that, but my reading of it is it does not establish that right to vote.
I think they did intend the idea of privileges and immunities, and one of those privileges would be the right to vote. Right. So when you have Section 1 with privileges and immunities of citizenship is the right to vote for all males 21 and over. Move to Section 2, as you alluded to, Mike, is a process for taking away representation from states that prohibit that right to vote. And I think it was a Marr that said the 15th Amendment was, I think the word he used was superfluous because the right was in the 14th. But the trouble was the 14th, the punishment provision in Section 2 was never utilized. And then you get cases like United States v. Reese in 1876 that says, the 15th Amendment does not confer a positive right to vote. So, that whole idea of thinking of the right to vote as a fundamental right, that becomes a little shaky there, especially once privileges and immunities go by the wayside in the slaughterhouse cases.
So, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I just one final point here. I mean, everything I've read about Frederick Douglass's interpretation of the 14th, I don't think he thought that it was as clear as it needed to be. Like, I think it was one of the issues that he and others were wanting there to be something more specific about the right to vote. So, and he was one of the, obviously one of the people on the ground there fighting for these Reconstruction amendments.
Yeah, it's the pattern here of this 14th, and Chris, thank you. You've explained it, from what Amar has laid out, and what a lot of those people who were involved in the process of 14th Amendment believed it was going to do. All right, but you already see the mass resistance. Okay, so we'll spell it out in explicit language in another amendment. But even as Mike, we said, within what, 6 years, the interpretation of that is no, it still doesn't do that, kind of thing. So we just see the tremendous resistance, which lays the foundation of election and voting troubles of this country that still exist today. All right, in a country that likes to, argue that it's the greatest democracy in the world. All right, has probably one of the weakest protections for elections and voting, across the world. So,
and one more thing on this, David. I'm sorry, were you going to ask a follow up with the?
No, go ahead.
I mean, I would argue that nowhere in the Constitution is there a fundamental positive right to vote. And I'm happy to share with the students and teachers the way that countries have now put that in constitutions where it's clear. I mean, the 15th Amendment is you have the right to vote if you're a citizen. You can't be denied of that vote because of your race, color, or previous conditions of servitude, which leaves it wide open there, right, for states to do what they immediately started doing. Okay, well, that doesn't mean that you have to pay a tax to vote, right? That's not a deny. We're not denying you because of race. It's or a literacy test, or all these other things they come up with. If the 15th Amendment were written that all citizens have a right to vote, period, right, and the Congress can enforce it, then that would be a fundamental right to vote. We haven't, even in the 19th Amendment and the 20th, none of these amendments, it's always based on we won't deny you the right to vote because of something, rather than just saying you have a right to vote, full stop.
Okay, so Tim, we get to the 1960s and we get to two legislative acts, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Does that now fill in this blank spot on voting? Do those acts now establish voting as a right, a positive right?
I would say it's pretty dang close, but I think Mike's point about there's all kinds of, like, in 1870, I think it was, the enforcement of the Klan Act. There was punishments if you denied voting. So a lot of our legislation, we did it in 57. We created the first commission to had federal oversight of how states were running their elections. We did it in 60 with tougher penalties. And so much of the legislation and even the pre-clearance piece in the 60s, it seems like so much of subsequent legislation doesn't really want to say there is a right to vote. We're going to set up structures to ensure that if you have these voting policies, we're going to set up structures, and it's the anti-federalist nightmare. All of these laws seem to me to be oversight and structures and commissions to ensure that people can vote, but without the definitive statement of there is a right to vote.
Tim, I would think that would be I'm sorry, I think that would be an anti-federalist's wet dream.
Well, it's their nightmare come true.
Well, no,
Wait,
I'm saying it's their dream, because when we pass legislation or the court makes rules or we put in amendments that doesn't
Yeah.
say you have a right to vote,
Yeah.
therefore the folks on the ground in these states can find
Right.
ways around them to say, well, we're not denying you the right to vote because you're
Well,
black.
I don't know that we can accuse all the anti-federalists of being racist, but
Well, I know, but
we
it's
can
but
just
I'm
accuse them of being paranoid.
well, my point is in saying this is like because we've not just
Yeah.
come out and said it is a fundamental right to vote when you're
Yeah.
18 or over. As a citizen, you have a fundamental right to vote. Because we haven't said that, we've allowed localities and
Mhm.
places to find loopholes. So I mean, let's face it, it took a constitutional amendment to outlaw the poll taxes in '64. So I mean, I think that people that want to maintain this local control and deny access to the polls, whether it be to people of color, to women, whoever it may be, um, I would think by the fact that we don't have a definitive statement from
Yeah.
the government, I think that's why I think the John Lewis piece of legislation that would actually spell that out. But of course, we're not going to be able to get that through Congress right now anyway.
yeah, I'm with Chris on that. If the Voting Rights Act of 1965 had been explicit, you know, then I'm with you, Tim. Then that's the anti-federalist worst nightmare. But it just again, it just is so curious that we even into the second half of the 20th century, our political institutions refuse to use that language. All right. Even though most Americans would say it's one of the most fundamental aspects of living in a government of the people, by the people, for the people, is that they should have a fundamental right to have access to vote. Yet the political system won't do that. And I think Chris articulated it very well. And we've seen it. We've seen it play out. And we see it play out right now. We talked about the question to the FOP question of the day. The Republicans have presented a new law, all right, and it's a national law that they want that will require states, to require ID in one form or the other in order for people to register to vote there. And so we just see this consistent pattern of this fear, all right, of allowing all American citizens to participate in the system. And I can understand that, I guess, in parts of our history. I just don't understand that today. There, Mike, I couldn't tell if you wanted to jump in on that.
Well, I think why you see it today, I mean, it's because of this text and this history, because there's not a fundamental right stated clearly, it changes the way political parties think of elections. And I think in today's era, it's the Republicans who are strategizing not on how to get people to the polls, on how do we stop people getting to the polls. The Democrats are doing the same thing, right? Through the how do we stop people from getting? So this is not a party thing. There was when I was at the DNC convention, it was really interesting to hear these political operators talk about the different strategies. And they said the Republicans have set up a infrastructure, really trying to come up with rules and things to keep people away from the polls, because it's legal if they can do it now after Shelby County, right? If you have control over where you put a polling booth, and you're not abridging someone's right to vote because you have no right to vote someplace close to you, right? If you have to drive an hour to get to your polling place, then that's a legal mechanism that you use in elections, not with the goal of getting as many voices and perspectives heard, but as a way of what was the language they're using? The parties that win the elections are the ones that are able to shape the electorate most successfully, right? That is a strategy that I don't see happening in countries where there is a fundamental right to vote, where you don't have that legal premise to even shape the electorate. The electorate is all citizens over a certain age or whatever, right?
So, Chris,
Before Dave, before you ask a question, I want to go back for a second too and throw this out there. I think in terms of like the national government influencing states, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the 17th Amendment, because with the ratification of the 17th Amendment, in 1913, part of coming out of the populist progressive era. You're taking a huge power away from state governments because state legislatures were electing their senators.
Yeah.
And so I think that's also something for students to consider with the ratification through Congress and the states the idea of taking that power away from state legislatures to determine their own Senate seats. So I think that was a big shift as well.
Well,
So
yeah,
sorry.
and to me, it undermined the purpose of the Senate. The purpose of the Senate was to represent, or senators, was to represent state interests. And that state interest would be communicated to them through the election process by the state legislature. When you go to direct election, you now give parties the power to bypass, national parties, the power to bypass state interests. And I think we'd all agree that you have a number of people in both parties who are members of the Senate who don't pay attention, don't vote what is in the interest of their state, all right, but are more concerned about what's in the interest of their party.
I would disagree with that, David, because the idea of the Fair Practices Act in 1910, this is coming about because of the corruption that's happening at the state level. And we've all seen the cartoon. I think we've talked about it before about the Senate. It's the people's entrance is barred, but the big trusts come in as money bags because you're having big money interests, which may not be much different than right now, but you have money interests coming in and dropping all this money on state legislatures. And so the feeling was, let's make the Senate more responsible to the people in the state. So I think that was where that was coming from at that time frame. That's the historical lens for the 17th Amendment.
Okay, so what's your opinion based upon your deep study of history? Has it worked out that way? Are senators more responsive to the people of the issues that affect the people of their state?
I think they can be. I think sometimes they are beholden. Well, they can be. I mean, honestly, they can be, but they also know that they're also beholden to the national party because partly, honestly, because of the gerrymandering that's happening at the state level, then you end up with things that are non-competitive.
Well, that's in the House. That's not in the Senate.
House, yeah.
Well, but again, because of gerrymandering that happens, you end up with gerrymandered state legislatures. You end up with a control of the state government, and granted, they're not electing the senators, but that bleeds over into the election of senators. So I think that maybe you're right to a degree right now that some senators are not as beholden to their constituents within their state, but I would say.
Yeah, I mean, we all know the states have varied interests too. I mean, senators have to. I mean, there's all kinds of factions that senators has to deal with that maybe House members don't as much.
Yeah.
So the representation of factions at the Senate level is also a complication there of is it good representation the way it was supposed to design to
Right,
be.
and I think, and Chris, I mean, you make a very good point that even before the 17th Amendment, they're passing legislation to try to diminish the influence of money. Well, we know that the more modern Supreme Court has gutted that ability, which to me puts the Senate in the hands of smaller factions within their states who have greater access to funds, all right, and can motivate members of the Senate to represent not the interest of the majority of the people of their state. And again, I think we can all talk about, I thought was an interesting political science book, What's the Matter with Kansas? That if we look at the social economic realities of Kansas, the Republican Party, other than on social issues, I'll give it the social issues, all right? But on the economic issues, the Republican Party does not represent the interests of most Kansans. All right.
David,
and why is that? Go ahead.
The only thing I would correct on your last statement was that you're talking about money within the state, because we know that the court has allowed money just to flow, right? It's just in dark money. Who knows, money from perhaps foreign entities. So by the court in some of his rulings, by saying, hey, money is speech, I don't think that senators are limited to taking money from within their state. I think they're taking money from wherever they may need it. And, Let's face
Right.
it, it's part of the issue is how expensive it is to run for office, how long our campaign season is, the fact that all politicians are beholden to donors, and they're talking serious money here. I'm sure that you guys would probably be getting text messages from people running for office all around the country wanting money. I get them constantly. So it's, money from senators running in other states would like my money. So that with the court rulings on campaign finance, all bets are off on money.
So do you see that as the biggest contributing factor to, I just found this stat from Statista research organization revealed this past year that 40%, nearly 40% of Americans do not trust that elections are fair in this country. Is the influence of money the biggest contributing factor to that data? Why do you think that is? Why do you think that a good chunk of Americans don't trust our election system? And what would you suggest we do to decrease that distrust?
Who's that too?
That's the Chris.
I think we've had so much misinformation in the last, I don't know, let me say 6 years, 8 years, about elections and the demonization of what's happening. That the seeds of doubt have been sown, and we're going to reap the harvest here in 2024, I'm afraid, in less than 2 months. Because as we know, there's been very, very, very little election fraud, minuscule election fraud. Our elections are some of the most fair, transparent, successful elections. And think about it, we're talking from national elections down to local elections. So we have hundreds and hundreds of elections within our country, and they are by the most part, they are fair, they are transparent, and both run by both Republicans and Democrats at the state level. But because because we've had people that want to throw doubt on things, because that doubt will help create an unrest. I mean, my goodness, all we have to do is look at what happened in January 6th, right? When people stormed the Capitol, when the Capitol had to go on lockdown, when people beating Capitol police officers with American flagpoles, when they're chanting "Hang Mike Pence." I mean, this is the reality. I mean, this is not hyperbole. This is the reality, all because they were told that the election was stolen. So how does it make it go away? I don't know how we break the fever. But my fear is, as you guys are probably aware, both parties right now are spending a lot of money on lawyers to deal with what's going to be a contested election, because people are going to try and throw doubt on the outcome of the election. And that has just damaged what has really been, our elections have really been pretty good. So.
Right. And I guess I find a connection in our previous episode, we talked about the impact of social media on political culture, civil discourse.
Disinformation.
And I don't know how we get out of this unless somehow we regulate. I mean, again, Fox News got sued and lost a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for disinformation. So traditional, what you call it, legacy media outlets. To me, there's ways to control that. There's ways to regulate their dissemination of disinformation that damages the body politic. Our problem here is with social media. I don't know if we can dig our way out of this. Mike, what do you think?
I don't know if we can dig our way out of it, given what we talked about on a previous episode about social media and the legal and constitutional maybe barriers to regulate. I was going to make the same point you're going to make. You look at the Gallup polling on this, and it's really interesting. 70s there was Watergate, 2000 like super close election that I think legitimate concerns about how fair it was, right? But we see through the 70s, we see generally trust in elections is still pretty good. In 2004, the trust in election rebounds. Now, maybe that's a 9/11 effect, but this is really where Gallup begins with this sees this is in 2016. We've always had political and cultural entrepreneurs who want to spread ideas about conspiracy theorists. They've been on the right and the left. What social media has allowed these entrepreneurs to do, though, is just to reach such a bigger audience. And this is where I think we talked last episode about, I think we're talking about social movements and can social media really reframe the public's thinking on an issue, right? On this one, the students, I don't have an answer to this. I think this is just an interesting question for you to be thinking about. Have we seen, is this a place where there's been a reframing about the trustworthiness in elections just over the last 8 years, 8 to 10 years, right? That now you see these Gallup numbers that are so high. I do think social media is at play here more than money, although money is always going to be a factor in the ability for social media to be pumping this stuff out. But yeah, this links to our previous discussion for sure.
I think, I mean, historically, we had some really shady elections in the founding period. I mean, Delaware, there was all kinds of shenanigans during the ratification debates and sending folks to their convention. There were, I mean, elections back in the founding, they could go maybe anywhere from like a day to a week. And frankly, in some places, you just kind of never knew when the polls were going to close. In fact, there was people would break in and steal the ballot boxes and stuff ballot boxes. I mean, the Gilded Age political machines were quite those elections were quite corrupt. So I guess I'm always prone to kind of temper my the tendency to say, I mean, I'm not denying that 40% of the people think they're corrupt. I'm just suggesting we've had a lot more corruption associated with elections in the past than we seemingly do now. And I think that's to Chris's point and Mike's point about the megaphones that are out there. I mean, it's all those crazy people in California. I trust my polling places. Because I know these little old ladies there that are counting, they're wonderful. They would never do anything, but it's these Californians, I
No,
don't trust you people
leave
out
us
there.
out of this. It's the Arizonans.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, fair enough.
We aren't going to mention Florida.
That
Oh, no, they're all virtuous, righteous down there. Yeah.
Tim, you're making a surprisingly really good empirical argument. I just want to put a pin in that because you're making it really is it's a very elegant argument you're making. You're kind of saying objectively with the facts, there has been a lot of corrupt elections, and to Chris's point, maybe objectively with the facts, maybe we run our elections much better in the 21st century than we have in any other century. But now the public opinion is finally catching up with a reality that is about 100 years old. And it's just this mismatch, right? Of the and the thoughts about it. Yeah.
I'm sorry about being a little political sciencey there.
We welcome all of you.
Okay.
It's always, I love to see the signs of growth from a man of your advanced age, that you still are a lifelong learner. All right.
Are you talking about me?
No, I'm talking about Tim. No, you're a lost cause. All right. But Tim's showing a political science side. All right. Kind of thing. So that's just, again, it's encouraging and inspirational. So Mike, I think it's always good for students to step outside of our national bubble and kind of look at these questions from an international perspective. And I know I've got some family members and stuff who do not live in this country, and they say, you guys seem to put a lot of energy into discussing and debating elections and voting. And since 2020, at least 9 states, and I don't know if that number is too low, 9 key states, I think is what it better put it that way, have passed legislation making it harder to vote according to the Brennan Center report. What I'm wondering is, do other democracies around the world have the same concerns, challenges? And I want to add one. The way I understand it is the two major concerns right now, all right, in this country, as articulated by certain elements out there, are machines doing the counting. So the technology and the trustworthiness of these machines, and then mail-in voting, and how the trail of that mail can be corrupted. I'm wondering, do other nations have the same problems, issues with their voting processes and as we do?
Not exactly. And what's really interesting in here is to highlight some of the countries that have more recently become concerned about these things. The research out there is countries like Hungary, Poland, India, Turkey. There's more of a discourse of, oh, these elections are possibly corrupt. And my objective take on my take on that, my opinion on that, is that these are leaders who are trying to restrict the number of people to vote for their own political gain. And these are all countries that Freedom House and other organizations would say are becoming less free, right? So the United States is sort of we're having discussions that those countries are having. If you look at established democracies in Europe, Australia, even like South Korea, no, there aren't these discussions. There's a high use of mail-in voting. There's a little concern about it. Most countries have automatic registration or kind of either automatic or no registration, kind of like North Dakota. So we really are, again, an outlier with these types of conversations. And I know it's not part of your question, but I think there's a way for students to take another angle on this and to look at states and kind of disaggregate the data and see which states what are different state laws and how does that relate to either polling, like trust in elections, how does it relate to voter turnout? Does your constitution have a right to vote for state elections stated in there, a more positive right? Has there been litigation on that? What have state Supreme Court said on that? I think there's a way definitely to look out and to do the comparative, but to do a comparative like within the United States and just sort of see the differences between states as well.
Are you guys familiar with the show Firing Line?
Yeah.
The new version with Margaret Hoover?
No, I have not seen the new version.
Yep.
I'm going to put a link in the show notes to a PBS series called Counting the Vote, where she actually traveled around and spoke to state election officials, folks of every stripe, and is very revealing. What she reports on in terms of, again, we think what made me think of that, Dave, was your idea about the voting machines, right? We still have overwhelmingly like 90%. I'm gonna have to check the statistic, but I think she said 90% of our votes are on paper. There's a paper trail. Even though we vote on a machine, it still creates a paper trail. But it's an excellent series that examines what's happening at the state level, within states, to Mike's point, about see what your state does. And it really just is like lays it out that we don't have issues with fraud now. We don't have the issues that people believe we have. And so I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. But for the kids wrestling with this question, this would definitely be a great program for you to watch.
So, Mike, I just want to touch base and make sure I understand the advanced democracies that you talked about that don't have these problems. The one consistent element is they're all national, centralized run elections.
Yes.
They don't leave it up to their provinces or their states to decide all the rules.
They do not. Now, the one country that I didn't look into in particular, but the students, if it's going to be in a country, take a look at Switzerland. There's a strong decentralized federal approach there, and that may be a little more localized. But all the other ones, yeah, it's a centralized commission or unit that is in charge of running elections at the national level.
Well, imagine that. So All right, gentlemen, we've come to the end of our conversation, and so it's time to turn to final thoughts, insights, and recommendations for students and teachers who are going to be addressing this question. So, Mike, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, this question to me just sort of really highlights the work that that needs to be done to fulfill the aspirations of whatever aspirations we have to be a democracy. And I think there's a way to have this conversation without being, I think constructive criticism is good. I think that that's the most patriotic thing you can do. I think by making these arguments that we could be doing elections a little better is needed. And the other thing that strikes me thinking through this question is how much we as a society need to be grateful to those who historically have been the most marginalized, the most vulnerable, the ones who haven't had these protections. Without the hard work of Black Americans and Native Americans and women Americans, who knows whether we are even as close as we are, right? I think it's a real testament to the work that those groups have done to kind of push us to either be the country we said we wanted to be in 1789 or the country we said we wanted to be in 1868.
Chris?
What Mike said, but also I would ask the students, why do people want to restrict voting rights versus why do people want to make voting easier? And back to our discussion, would it be easier if simply Congress would come out and say, yes, you have a fundamental right to vote in this country if you're a citizen and you're above the age of 18, right? But we see barrier after barrier after barrier being put in place. Even just a little side, even in the state of Florida, when they voted a couple of elections ago to restore voting rights to people that were convicted felons. And then the state legislature said, well, you're only going to get those if you paid all your fines. That's not what the people voted on, but they're going to, again, put a barrier there. They're very quick to make sure if you're a former felon, you're going to get your Second Amendment right back. But your right to vote, we're going to restrict that a little bit. So ask yourself, why is it that people are putting barriers in the way? And why is it people are trying to make it easier for folks to vote?
Professor Moore.
Is really a fantastic book for a generation now. Alan Kesar, The Right to Vote, America's Contested History, blah, it's got a subtitle. But it's the single, and readable, and it's really a wonderful story he tells about America's contested right to vote struggle. It's a great book, and I would recommend it being on every teacher's shelf. The Right to Vote by is it Alan Kesar, or
Yeah,
he's out of Harvard? I think he's out of Harvard, but it's a fantastic book that I would highly recommend for this question.
the only downside to that, Tim, is it came out so long ago. It's not going to take us to where we are right now.
Well, I don't care. I mean, this is history now. I mean, come on.
He's abandoned.
I said corrected.
That's right.
Hey,
I'm sticking my head in the sand. Head in the sand.
He abandoned that political science element there. He was only there for a few seconds. Now he's
gonna go take a shower.
Yeah. My thought is just Article 1, Section 4 is a beautiful statement of federalism. It also reveals the cancer of federalism on the body politic. All right. And I think it also reveals the lack of courage that Congress has, because the power is there for them to act, but they refuse more often than not than to use it. Well, I do hope that this has helped you in your studies and preparation for Unit 3, Question 2. In our next session, when we see you again or see your classmates again, we're going to be looking, I believe, at Unit 5 and a classic struggle of Amendment 6 and Amendment 1. the right to due process of law and a fair trial, and the right to the First Amendment, freedom of the press and speech. There we get to delve into a great case, Shepard versus Maxwell, a little bit, and see how well that's developed over time. Until then, peace, love, yogurt, tacos. Go Dodgers. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.